When we talk about how memory works in psychology, we usually use the Atkinson-Shiffrin model, or AS model of memory. It's used as a way of conceptualizing the different processes and stages of our memories. It's worth noting though, as I go over the AS model in this video, that these processes and stages don't necessarily refer to specific parts of the brain. They refer more to interconnected functions within the brain. Let's start by talking about the different processes that go into the AS model. Those processes are encoding, storage, and retrieval. Encoding is the input of information into the memory system. I like to think of it as paying attention or noticing something. Storage is the creation of a permanent record of that information. Another way of thinking about it is that storage is the actual forming of a new memory. Retrieval is getting that information from our memory so that we're consciously aware of it and able to use it. I talked about this before in the general overview video for memory. In psychology, we think of how memory works as being similar to how a computer works. Imagine you're writing a paper. You pull up a Word document and start typing on it. This is encoding. Once you're done writing the paper, you have to save it to the computer. This is storage. Finally, it's time for you to submit the paper. You need to find where you saved it in your computer and upload it, which is a good example of retrieval. Memory works the exact same way. There are also 3 stages to the AS model of memory. We have sensory memory, short-term memory, and long-term memory. Sensory memory refers to the sensory information that we're exposed to almost non-stop throughout our lives. Most of this information we don't really even notice or pay attention to. Just now, wherever you are, take a few moments to just think about the sights, sounds, and feelings that you don't really pay attention to. This may be something like the feeling of the clothes on your skin, the sensation of your own breathing, or even the sensation and sounds of something like the air conditioning in your own home or car. This makes up our sensory memory. When we pay attention to this sensory information, the information is encoded from our sensory memory to our short-term memory. The short-term memory, like the name suggests, is a short period of about 30 seconds where we're aware of information, but it hasn't necessarily been remembered yet. A good way to think of short-term memory is it contains the information that is actively part of our consciousness. That means we're aware of it and actively thinking about it or noticing it. The general capacity of a person's short-term memory is about 7 bits of information. This is an average though. Some people may have a higher average, some have a lower one. It can also fluctuate based on a lot of factors. I'm not a morning person. If I just woke up, I'm probably not able to juggle 7 bits of information in my short-term memory. However, after taking a shower, drinking some coffee, maybe a lot of coffee, I may be able to do more than 7 bits of information. Now, most of the information that is in our short-term memory will never become a memory. It may be information that is just not important, like the sensation of our clothes on our skin, or information that is just difficult for us to comprehend, like when we're trying to study for a test. There are plenty of ways to make sure that we are better able to remember information from our short-term memory. And if you're interested in that, please check out my video on memory enhancing strategies. You can find the link for it below. Now, most information in short-term memory gets lost, but if we happen to remember it for whatever reason, we store that information into our long-term memory. Long-term memory is the continuous storage of information. When information is stored in our long-term memory, it is no longer actively part of our conscious awareness, but can be recollected at a later point to be used. There are many different parts to our long-term memory. Generally speaking, long-term memory is divided into 2 categories. Those categories are explicit memories and implicit memories. Explicit memory is also known as declarative memory, although that term isn't as common anymore. It includes memories that we can describe and be fully consciously aware of. It includes things like semantic memory and episodic memory. Semantic memory is your memory of facts and information. I like to think of semantic memory as being your Jeopardy memory. So for example, if I were to ask you to remember the definition of encoding, which I talked about earlier in this video, I would be testing your semantic memory. Episodic memory is more of like your autobiographical memory. It's your memory of events that you have personally experienced throughout your own life. So instead of asking you about what encoding is, a good test of your episodic memory would be me asking you to tell me about what happened at your high school graduation. The other category of your long-term memory involves your implicit memories, which are sometimes called non-declarative. These are memories for things that are difficult to describe or recollect. They often are very automatic and aren't things we are fully consciously aware of. One type of implicit memory is something called procedural memory, which some people call muscle memory. Procedural memory involves skilled actions or movements. Some examples of procedural memories are things like brushing your teeth, tying your shoelaces, or driving a car. If you're someone who's really good at typing on a keyboard and don't even have to look at the keys to type, this is another great example of a procedural memory. In fact, a lot of times when we do consciously think about these activities, it can actually confuse us and prevent us from doing those tasks well. There are other types of implicit memories, like behaviors that we learn through classical conditioning or even emotional connections we may have to something. Like every time I smell cookies being baked, it makes me feel really comfortable and happy, or why I hear a certain song come on the radio that makes me feel a little emotional. If you remember earlier in this video, I said that the short-term memory is the stage where you're actively aware of the information. Well, the whole purpose of our memory system isn't just to store a bunch of useless information. It's to store information that we can access later to help us live our lives better. We need to be able to retrieve the information we store in our long-term memory. When we do this, we are of course consciously aware of that information again. So we generally retrieve information from our long-term memory back into our short-term memory. However, usually when we do this, we don't refer to it as short-term memory, we call it working memory. So working memory is being consciously aware of information that has been previously stored in our long-term memory. It's important to remember that our memory system is very diverse and dynamic. Some types of memory change over time, while others may not. For example, episodic memories tend to stand out more for events that happen in our late teens to early 20s. And this is true well into old age. This is because that time period is one of a lot of change, and those moments tend to make stronger memories. Semantic memory tends to increase over our lives, barring any kind of injury or illness that may impact it. People with certain types of amnesia may find that their episodic memories are completely lost, but their procedural memories are fully intact. So they may not know who they are, but they can still drive a car or tie their shoelaces. Another thing that many people have a misconception on is they view their memory as being like a library. Each book in this library is a specific memory. This used to be the going belief in psychology for many decades. They referred to specific pieces of information in your memory as being an engram. However, our understanding has increased dramatically. Your memory, and really your brain in general, is massively interconnected. Instead of thinking about a specific memory as being like a book in a library that can be checked out when needed, think of your memory as being like a symphony where multiple different parts of your brain work together to create something amazing. This view is summarized in something called the Equipotentiality Hypothesis. If one part of your memory or brain is damaged, then other parts are able to compensate for that damage to maintain the memory. It's like that orchestra I mentioned a second ago. If one player in the orchestra isn't present or stops playing, it doesn't drastically change the overall sound you may hear. It just goes to show how incredible and sometimes fragile our memories actually can be. Thanks for watching, everybody.